One of the big things that stands out about financial markets at the moment is the lack of volatility. And it goes across markets from derivatives to the oil market to pretty much everything that is touched by central banks. Talk to me about how you see your business and the business that you look at and how it's going to change as a result.
Well, the derivatives markets, of course, have traditionally been, particularly when we're talking about the kind of commodity classes such as oil, agriculture, have always had some degree of volatility. One could argue that's the very reason our markets exist, particularly the futures markets. And so I think we're going to continue to see the futures markets develop and respond to global volatility, particularly those that may be caused by geopolitical events.
I'm sitting here in London. We're about to go through Brexit. We're about to have the opportunity to deal with our own regulatory structures that allow us to be competitive. What are you expecting from London? How much more competitive do you think we're going to be after Brexit?
Well, it's really a question for the authorities in London. What I can say is that over the past couple of years, both in the 6 months here at the job at the CFTC, my former position at the Treasury Department, I've worked closely with HM Treasury, the Bank of England, the FCA, to really ensure that hopefully post-Brexit, the United States and the UK will even have a stronger relationship. And so I think Brexit is a great opportunity for the UK. It'll ultimately be your choice as to how your markets look post-Brexit. I think our major concern is also making sure that there's no financial stability risk emanating from Brexit. We've worked closely with the European Union as well as the UK to ensure that doesn't happen. And we look forward to continuing that conversation in the months ahead. I do think, and I will say, the very fact that we know we're going to have a Brexit now, I think will be helpful to the market because it provides some certainty.
So, Heath, I believe your 6-month anniversary on the job is on Wednesday, so congratulations, and congratulations on the new logo, which looks a little bit like an American flag as well. I'm curious as to where you are in your agenda. When, for example, do you anticipate a finalized rule on, for example, cross-border swap regulations or position limits?
So cross-border rules, we got out the door in December before the new year, so we'll be looking to finalize that in 2020. Position limits will actually be proposing it at the end of this month, so just a couple of weeks away, with the hope again in closing it out in 2020. This is the 45th anniversary year of the CFTC, so hence the new logo, but also a very ambitious agenda to go with it. Both focused on closing out some of the things that came from the Dodd-Frank Act, now that we have the 10th anniversary of Dodd-Frank coming up this summer, but also focusing on the 2020s, the new decade with the CFTC, tackling issues like digital assets, for example. So it's both a little bit old, and something new, as they say.
I want to get to how much time you're actually spending on fintech and crypto and regulating that industry and bringing actions actually in that industry at the moment. But first, just to finish out on the derivatives proposal that you say will be finalized this year. There is a complaint that non-US based dealers might have a little bit of an advantage because the easing of the burdens will help them more. What do you say to that criticism?
Sure. So at least in the proposed rule, we'll see what happens when we finalize it. But one of the focus is granting swap dealer registration or recognition to those jurisdictions that have comity with ours. Comity meaning they have the similar laws and regulations that we recognize as equivalent. So the whole goal here is to make sure that we have a fair and level playing field, that we don't have overlapping regulations. So we grant deference when an institution that's overseas has a very similar regulatory regime to our own, as opposed to a regime that doesn't exist overseas. Those swap dealers would still have to potentially comply with our program. So that is the point, is to recognize that other jurisdictions like the UK, like Europe, like Japan, for example, they've gone ahead and implemented the G20 reforms just like the United States has. And so if they're regulated in a similar way, they should be treated in a similar way and not subject to overlapping regulations.
Mr. Tarbert, do you think the US approaches financial regulation for fintech in the correct fashion? Again, it's a challenge that we're trying to spend a lot of time with here in London. I'm just kind of wondering, as you look around the world, who has the best approach to regulating this upcoming space? Because it's going to be hugely competitive, but also hugely important to the financial sectors that we all have in our various jurisdictions.
Absolutely. So the hallmark of the CFTC, and it's in our mission statement, is sound regulation. So with fintech, then the question becomes, how do you have sound regulation and at the same time promote innovation? We're studying what other jurisdictions are doing. We're a member of the GFIN, which was started in the UK, which is the Global Financial Innovation Network. We're seeing what countries like Singapore and others are doing. But at the same time, we want to be responsible. So it's a question of getting that balance right, of making sure on the one hand, we don't unduly stifle innovation, but on the other hand, we are regulating these markets. And some of them, because they're new, because they're developing, there are things that are going on there that require and demand regulation. So I'd say we're still studying other regimes, but we want to get that balance right. We want to have sound regulation that balances innovation, but does so responsibly.